Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to one of the most important events of the year of the Free Press Society, the giving of our annual Award for Freedom of Expression, the Sappho Award. For those of you who might not know what the Sappho Award is, it is an award we give once a year to a person who we think delivers an exceptional contribution for freedom of speech. This year, the award goes to the British journalist, author and commentator Douglas Murray. And even though there are many worthy people we could choose for this award, there was no doubt in our mind that this year the award should go to Douglas Murray. This is, by the way, not the first time Douglas Murray has visited us here at the Free Press Society, and we are certainly hoping that it will not be the last. However, today is an extra special occasion, and it is a great honor for us to welcome you, Douglas, to receive this award, an award which you richly deserve. This year is the 12th year that we in the Free Press Society are awarding this special Freedom of Speech Prize. The criteria being that it must be given to a person who has shown an uncompromising and fearless attitude and tireless work towards the struggle for free expression. Earlier recipients of the award have been, amongst others, Danish journalist and editor Flemming Rose, German SPD politician and author Thilo Sarrazin, Russian journalist and human rights campaigner Olga Romanova, and Canadian author and commentator Mark Stein. All, like Douglas Murray, fearless defenders of free speech. Before giving the floor to our Deputy Chairman, Lone Nørgaard, who will initiate the proceedings, I would very much like to thank Pernille Bendiksen of the Danish People's Party for making this possible for us to be here today at the seat of Danish democracy, the Danish Parliament. It is both a luxury and quite appropriate to award a Freedom of Expression Award in this setting. Many thanks to you, Pernille, and thanks to the Danish People's Party for making this possible. And now a few practical comments about today's proceedings. After Lone Nørgaard has spoken and after the award ceremony, Douglas Murray will give us a talk. Then we will take a break of approximately 20 minutes where you can enjoy a glass of wine and mingle, and you will also here have the opportunity to purchase Douglas Murray's book, The Strange Death of Europe, which has just very recently been translated into Danish. The book costs 200 kroner, a singular bargain for such an important, enlightening, and unfortunately also frightening book. Afterwards, we will gather here again where you will have the opportunity to ask questions, which Douglas Murray will endeavor to answer. Our day ends at 4 o'clock, whereafter Douglas Murray will be available to sign his book for those of you who wish it. And with these words, I now relinquish the podium to Lone Nørgaard.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, Mr. Douglas Murray. It is a great honor for the Free Press Society and for Denmark that you are here today. It's hard to find a person who fulfills the mission statement of the Free Press Society better than you. You have demonstrated great initiative and talent for the hard journalistic digging work on a high international level. Fearlessly, layer by layer, you have uncovered the harsh facts and led your readers and listeners towards the outlines of the possibility of a better world. In a constant struggle with the mainstream media that much too often don't want to listen to and communicate the facts you present them with. You are a true defender of free speech, which you have demonstrated on numerous occasions. Your contributions to the analysis of the Charlie Hebdo attack on several television channels is one example. Carefully balanced between passionate and cool. Your unbiased contribution to the discussion with Sam Harris on Stéphane Molyneux and Jared Taylor, another example, in which you are opposing the guilty by association tactic in favor of free speech. It is also a great honor for me personally that I've been given the opportunity to present this year's Sappho Award. As most people present know, the idea of the Sappho Award is to pay tribute to a person who has used his or her right to free speech, wherever it is threatened and wherever the truth has difficulty in getting through to the public. Often at great personal costs because the speaker has dealt with and commented on controversial issues. I don't know how extensive the personal costs have been for you, Douglas Murray, but I do know that over the years you have had to put up with quite a lot in the public debate for everyone to follow at YouTube. Most people in the audience know you and your significant work, but for those who might not, just a few words about your career. You are a journalist and political commentator, and you are the founder of the Center for Social Cohesion. Furthermore, you are the Associate Director of the Henry Jackson Society and Associate Editor of the British magazine The Spectator. You appear regularly in the British broadcast media, where you comment on issues such as free speech, immigration, and gay rights, mind you, from a conservative standpoint. And you are a firm and steady critic of Islam, one of those unhappy few actually knowing what they are talking about. Last but not least, you are the author of some very important books, the latest one being The Strange Death of Europe, Immigration, Identity, Islam. A wake-up call for every single Westerner and supporter of Western democracies and the Western civilization. The value of your book is reflected in the fact that, published in 2017, it has already been translated into several languages and now, fortunately, into Danish. Hail to your Danish publisher and translator, Jens Ellikær. No hail to the Danish mainstream media, which have been remarkably reluctant to pay attention to your book. Your voice, along with Jordan B. Peterson's, has gradually become more and more important in the debate about Europe's survival. In this struggle, you have certainly established yourself as a man deserving deep respect. The cliché, a torch in these darkening ages, in your case is no exaggeration. Back to YouTube, which has turned out to be an excellent source to learn from your elegant debating style. I watch you all the time and always enjoy heartily listening to and learning from your arguments, which reveal your deep knowledge, your extensive reading, your composure, your wit, your charm, and your sense of humor. Your ironical understatements are always a rhetorical delight, without, however, yielding to empty rhetoric, always with substance and factual evidence. Just one example of your style, picked randomly from a speech delivered during the David Horowitz's Restoration Weekend 2017, concerning the lies in the immigration debate. For instance, the lie about migrants being an economic gain for their society and that immigrants would enrich society. Quote, once you go over that lie, you get to another one, which the German people and others were told, which is that we are an aging population, we are a graying population, and therefore we need, obviously, to bring people in to keep us and our society into the standards to which we have become accustomed. Of course, this argument always ignores one extraordinary thing, which none of the politicians ever seem to be able to recognize, which is the startling fact that migrants get old as well. It's amazingly enough, it's not just us Europeans who suffer the aging process. Who knew? Unquote. You have worked your way into the league of great living Englishmen who serve as role models for humbler souls. Men such as Roger Scruton, Peter Hitchens, Theodore Dalrymple, Nigel Farage, Pat Condell, and may I in this closed circle add Tommy Robinson. Douglas Murray receives the Sappho Award because he has done his homework so brilliantly and stood up staunchly for his position in the debate. Your books, your articles, and your public appearances demonstrate the importance of truth. Therefore, in the perspective of free speech, you are an inspiring example to follow. Ladies and gentlemen, please acknowledge this year's Sappho Award recipient, the one and only Douglas Murray.
Thank you, I should do that. Need help with the packing. Thank you. So kind. Okay. Thank you very much. It's very kind. Well, thank you very much for that. I feel like I should go home after such a kind introduction. Nothing more I want to hear or say. But firstly, I should just say thank you to both of you. Thank you to the Free Press Society. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for organising this and for honouring me in this way. And it's a really a huge honour, and it's very flattering and humbling to receive the Sapphoprise. I have thought at times that I'm the only person I know who hasn't received it, because my few friends, all of them have, and so I was worried that you were sort of going to give it to my mother before you gave it to me. But I'm very genuinely delighted and touched as well. I wanted to say, by the way, before getting on to the substance of my remarks to you today, a little bit about a few of the previous recipients of the prize, because it really is an astonishing list of people. And I don't want to go through them all because we could be here all day, but they are all very remarkable people, and I'm very proud to say that a number are very good friends. Fleming Rose, I know, was given the Sappho Prize in 2007, and Fleming and I have done many things over the years, including, most memorably to me at any rate, an occasion in London about 8 years ago when he and I debated Tariq Ramadan and somebody called Petrus Steiner, I think he was a Dutch politician who was eminently forgettable. And Tariq Ramadan, of course, as you'll know, the dauphin of the Brotherhood, now sadly in custody in a French jail, which doesn't happen to all of my opponents, but it's obviously a possibility. Anyhow, of course, I won't prejudge the judge in the impending court case by commenting on his case. But it was a very remarkable occasion that in London when Fleming and I were debating. I think the motion was that Europe has let down its Muslims. Islam has been let down by Europe. It was something like this. And we had a hall of people. It was organised by, I think, the British Council and something called Intelligence Squared. And it was a packed hall, and they had made the very basic mistake of giving away the tickets for free, which meant that there was a sort of mob-like atmosphere in the room. And people, when they got to Q&A, kept on getting up and asking unbelievably sort of interrogative and angry questions of Fleming and me. And this was in London, so I sort of felt I knew the audience and all that sort of thing. And there was a vote at the end whether we were right or whether Tariq Ramadan, now in jail, was right. And I actually said to Fleming before the vote was read out, I leaned over to him and I said, just be prepared, we're going to lose this big time. Big time. Just give a stoical face, stare forward, think of England. And the vote came in, and overwhelmingly the vote was on our side, which told me something very, very interesting, which was that although all of the vocal people in the debate, all the vocal people in the hall, all the booers and the hissers and everything like this, all the very angry young Muslims who were attacking Fleming and me, although they were the most vocal, it turned out that most of the public in there didn't like this one bit. And when they had a chance to have their say in a silent ballot, they put their piece of paper in, it was for the right side. Not the side of Tariq Ramadan, who's now awaiting trial in French jail. But anyway, it was one of many very enjoyable occasions with Fleming, and I remain an enormous admirer of his. Melanie Phillips received the Sapphoprize in 2009. She's become a great friend. Many years ago when I was starting out, and I'd say some of these things for the younger members of the audience here because they might be of some interest. Many years ago when I was starting out, I remember watching Melanie Phillips on the television. She was on a program called Question Time, and she was saying something that was completely true, and she was being howled at by everybody. And I remember she was just one woman holding her turf, and the whole audience was against her, and the whole panel was against her. And sometime later I actually met her at something, and first I met her, and I remember going over to her and saying, "Are you Melanie Phillips?" And she looked sort of, possibly. Who wants to know? You know, it was just naturally defensive of it. And I said, well, I just wanted to say, I saw you on television the other day, and I mean, you know, you were terrific. God, was an awful crowd. She's a remarkable figure. Mark Stein, who received this prize in 2010, has also become a great friend. I'm conscious that there are no dirty jokes left to make about the Sapphoprize. Mark absolutely blitzed the lot in 2010, and not one innuendo left untouched. When I started reading Mark again when I was starting off, and I always used to read him in The Spectator, then The Telegraph, and I remember always reading Mark and thinking, that's real style. I mean, almost no writers. I mean, one of the great advantages of those of us who are correct have is that we have the facts on our side, but the people who don't also have this just turgid, boring manner. Their prose and their speeches, they're so unenjoyable, almost as if this is sort of gruel. It's what you have to have, it's good for you. I mean, it may be horrible, it may be nasty, it may taste ghastly, it's good for you. It seems to be their view. And then here was Mark Stein writing these things that were not only obvious and true and brave, but very witty. And you can still remember some of his jokes from the very serious columns many years on. And then finally, I'll just mention Roger Scruton, who received the Sapphoprize in 2016. When you're starting off as a writer and journalist, it's very important to not only have heroes and people you look up to, but to find some of those people being supportive of you in return. And those of you who have already or some way into your careers will know this, that an encouraging voice at an early stage is an incredibly important thing. I was fortunate enough to meet Roger when I was doing an internship early in my career at a website that was meant to be left and right, meeting each other on equal terms and debating with care and sensitivity. And of course, it was about 50,000 leftists and Roger and me. And I remember him saying, it's a pretty even match, I think. But I was just starting off, and here was this man I enormously admired, right, as I say, got to know and become friends with, who was also an encouraging voice. And it's such an overlooked thing, I think, often in terms of these areas, that individuals make such a difference in the lives of other individuals, and an encouraging word, a useful steer, and that sort of thing is exactly what gets you going, and for many people keeps you going. So I've always been an enormous fan of Roger's, and I had the pleasure of seeing Roger just a couple of days ago in Cambridge with Jordan Peterson, and we were there for a day on Friday, and he asked me to send his regards as well. Anyhow, I have one other final thing to say about this, which is that as it happened when I was researching the strange death of Europe and travelling all over the continent, at one point I was on the Isle of Lesbos, and I had picked up a copy of the poems and fragments of Sappho, which I have with me today, and I had read them there, and it's inscribed Molivos on the Isle of Lesbos in August 2016, so it all feels like it was absolutely meant to be today. But let me just get to the substance of what I wanted to speak with here today. I'm looking forward very much to questions and answers, by the way. I'm looking forward to questions. Answers another thing, but and I hope you will ask me on as wide an array of subjects as you like, and whether or not it's something that's come up in my opening remarks or not. But let me just say a few things about this book that's now been so expertly translated into Danish. It's the result of several things, one of which has been a lot of travel and a lot of speaking with and to people across our continent. And despite Brexit, I still think of it as our continent. This is a very important few years for me, because I had been writing and thinking about issues to do with migration, integration, terrorism, extremism for a very long time. And sometimes, as many of you will know, your concerns on an area, your worries about it, end up having a focal point, a specific moment when you think, this is getting bad. For me, as for many of us, 2015 was that point. I had been already traveling widely around Europe, from the north, the south, east, to the west, and in 2015 I sped up my travels to try to take in as much as I could firsthand of what was happening across the continent, because I sensed from the very beginning of what became known as the migration crisis that there were a set of things, at the very least untrue, that were being said, and secondly, issues that were coming up that people were not thinking about nearly deeply enough. So when I say the things that were untrue, I mean things like the fact that from the outset this was described as a refugee crisis, when of course it was clearly in part a refugee crisis, but became a migrant crisis. It became a crisis of people from all over the world who discovered, thanks to the invitation of Angela Merkel, that here was a window of an opportunity to come into Europe. And I thought that much of the description of why people were coming wasn't being adequately reported. Much of the reporting about who was coming, or what the demographic makeup of the people who were coming, I felt a lot of this was missing. We had quasi-ecstatic scenes in which journalists did take part in the end. Many journalists have spoken to me about this since, that there was a feeling of something so historic and grand that they could be swept along with. And in that moment, nobody seemed to be willing to think about the much bigger questions we should have been thinking about and asking ourselves then. And 2015 was a bad time to start, but an important time. My view was that as the year progressed and as the numbers increased, there were a set of very, very basic questions which I realized that we in Europe had not asked ourselves, or at least, to put it another way, we were getting by on a sort of lie. And if I could condense that set of questions that we had not been adequately addressing, it would come down to this one in particular, which is, can Europe be the home for anyone in the world who wants to move in and call it home? Now, the answer to that seems to me very clearly no. But then the discussion begins. Okay, so who can it be for? Who is it more for? Are there people who it is more for than others? And the political class across most of Europe really did not want to address this question. Didn't want anything in the area around it. Some time ago, I ended up in a conversation with an MP in the UK, and I did this question to her face to face. I said, who do you not want more of in Britain? Of course, those of you who are politicians will know these are the sort of questions you don't want to get asked. And as her eyes widened, she ended up being able to come back with the suggestion that we didn't want more criminals in Europe. Which is probably true. Not quite enough, is it? Not quite enough. Everyone non-criminal in the world can come to Europe. What about somebody who was a young man who perhaps stole a loaf of bread once in the Tunisian marketplace and went to jail in Tunisia? Should he not be able to come in, even though he's sorry for that and he's in his 20s? Well, yeah, not all criminals, but war criminals shouldn't be allowed in. It's about 3 guys in The Hague who are staying there for the foreseeable future, thank goodness. So these questions, who is Europe for, who should it be for, and can it be for the world, and if not, what are the limits, were the sorts of questions which were on my mind all the time. And I knew when I was researching this book some of the dreams that people can dream in these areas. I experienced it myself. I described at one point on the Italian island of Lampedusa, where a lot of the boats were coming in 2015 and 16, and still are to a slightly lesser extent today. I described how on a place like Lampedusa, in the middle of the sea, equidistant between Sicily and the North African coastline, with these poor, undoubtedly unhappy, disadvantaged people washing up daily on the shoreline. Undoubtedly, you could have this view of, well, maybe this boatload could go to Copenhagen, and the next boatload could go to Malmo, and maybe the next one could go to Birmingham, and that one could go to Lille. And you see how bureaucrats and others might slip into the thinking of it. It's an understandable thing. Ours is a very big continent. This is a small number of people today. And maybe therefore we have to find some arrangement, and we'll find it. So I'm aware of the temptations of, I think, bad thinking which lay all around this. But the numbers and the nature of the movement seemed to me in 2015 to be it was a process that had been going on underway in Europe for decades, and it was on steroids in 2015. Because every single argument that had been used for years to justify mass migration, pretty much since the war, was coming out at this point. We had this example of the aging population argument, which is one of my favourites to shoot down, but you also had ones like they are going to culturally enrich us. There's something rather boring about Europe. We don't have enough culture of our own, and therefore we need to bring in a lot of people from sub-Saharan Africa to give us more. And this also presupposes, and there is a great deal of culture in most countries around the world, but it presupposes that the more people you have from a particular culture, the more of that culture you get, as if it's just an endless amount more you keep getting with each person. They just bring ever more drama and music and cuisine, and we just, till we're just so filled with it, it's just terrific. And so that was another one that came up a lot. But they were endless, and they were all versions of these arguments, as I say, that we've heard for many years. there were people making inevitably the comparisons with World War II, which was one of the most painful of all of the parallels that was done. People said things like, if we all regret, who doesn't regret not taking in more people in the Allied countries who wanted to flee Nazi Germany and didn't, therefore this is like this, and therefore if we fail to take in anyone who comes, we are basically turning away Jews from Nazi Germany. And this too, for reasons I go into in some detail in the book, is, I think, an entirely fallacious argument. There are groups in the world, most obviously the Yazidis in 2014, who have actually been the object of an attempted genocide, but it is preposterous, to put it no stronger, to claim that everybody who is suffering low socio-economic circumstances in any country around the world at the moment is morally comparable with a Jew fleeing a regime which wanted the destruction of all Jews everywhere. It's an outrageous equivalence to be made, and it has been made and is being made all the time. And this is why we saw, apart from anything else, those very strange scenes in Germany in 2015 with crowds of people at train stations welcoming the migrants, not just in a sort of manner of acceptance, but in a manner almost of jubilation, handing out some teddy bears and balloons and cheering, as if the people coming were a returning soccer team, returning from a foreign triumph, to be lauded by their hometown. It was a very strange set of things that were going on there, and that's why I also, apart from wanting to see this stuff face up and write about it face to face, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to go to the levels deeper than this in the book, and that's why a number of the chapters in the book focus on these deep, deep questions, which again need to be asked and need to be addressed. One of the most obvious, which I write about in a chapter not into Pascal Bruck there, called The Tyranny of Guilt, addresses this extraordinary claim that there's something that we in Europe have done in the past that means that we particularly ought to bring people in. There are forms of moral culpability which are multi-generational and which at any point mean that any peoples in the world can cash in their chit and make it to Europe on the back of some atrocity or some outrage some generations past. And this is a deep moral problem, but one I'm willing to engage in so long as the engagement is reciprocal. And a point I've made a number of times, and I make in the book, is that there's something very curious about this, which is that it is actually only Europe today, or you could say Europe and its effectively descendant civilizations, that suffer this claim. The Ottoman Empire was one of the largest and most important empires in history, one of the longest as well. But we would think somebody, a madman, who claimed that Turkey should be totally transformed because of the Ottoman Empire and should pay some kind of historical price for it by taking in people from all around the world, and what's more, they have no right to be Turkey today. The Turks have no right to be Turkish or to be proud of Turkey and so on. We would think somebody a madman who claimed that about any other country. And yet, a very significant amount of the people in our countries and a very significant amount of the people in charge have taken on precisely at least elements of this and other arguments. Now, by the way, I said in the I said about this that there were two things I had focused on particularly. One, as it were, the us bit of it, the what is it about us that means this is going on, and then the them bit, what is it about people who are wanting to come. But I've been very struck since the release of this book by the fact that people have tended to focus on the them bit of it and have almost entirely ignored the us bit. I was fairly sure when this book came out that I was going to get a fair amount of pushback, and I expected it would come largely to do with what I say about immigration. But I was struck and startled that to this stage nobody still has made a serious critique of my deeper critique of what is happening in the West. The deeper question of why are we allowing this to happen to ourselves? What are these strange thoughts that we've ended up imbibing? I was sure that people were going to push back on that, and they haven't, and that worries me because it tells me I might be right. Now, I should also say that one of the most interesting things for me in the last 18 months since this book came out has been not just the reaction to it in my own country, but the reaction and the changes that have happened elsewhere since it came out. In the UK, it came out at a very difficult time in our nation. A few weeks before it came out, a man, a convert to Islam, plowed a car across Westminster Bridge, killed 4 people, then leapt out of the car and stabbed a policeman to death in the gates of Parliament. Shortly after that, I think just as the book came out, a suicide bomber detonated at a pop concert on a Monday night in Manchester, at an Ariana Grande concert, and killed 22 people, mainly young women. And this book was already out, but it became the #1 bestseller in the UK the morning after the gang of another 3 terrorists went across London Bridge and Borough Market, slashing at people, deliberately, by the way, deliberately targeting women, deliberately trying to slashing throats of women and shouting, "This is for Allah." And most authors, when their book becomes a bestseller, are happy about it. But I have to say that I wasn't, because among other things, I was getting calls telling me that it was the #1 bestseller. At the same time, I was having calls from friends in London telling me they'd just been caught up in the latest terrorist attack. And so it was a very bleak time, and it hit a certain mood in the UK, and a certain concern that we have, at any rate in Britain, unlike Denmark and other countries that are, I think, far further forward in these discussions, we've been very, very cosseted in the debate and the discussion we've had. And I think that around that time there was an opportunity to break out a little further, to ask some of these deeper questions, and there was obviously a deep public desire to do so. But I've also been, for the last year, travelling when my schedule permits, to pretty much every single one of the countries in Europe again, partly when a translation comes out in that country. And I've found this, I haven't been able to turn it down because it is so endlessly and consistently fascinating. Because everywhere I go, even if I haven't been there for 18 months or 2 years, you find events moving all the time. And I wanted to focus a little bit on this because it strikes me as enormously interesting. The first thing is that there are some countries in Europe that are slightly baffled by this book. Not many. There's been one in particular, that was Portugal. I was in Portugal for the Portuguese translation launch earlier this year, and I did a little bit of research beforehand because, as you know, Portugal basically doesn't have a migrant issue because it skipped the 2015 flow. The 2015 flows went into Italy and Greece, but the Moroccan deal meant the Spaniards and Moroccans pretty much have held that together. And so although there are landings in Spain still, they're relatively small in number, and therefore Lisbon gets almost no knock-on effect from that. But I had a very interesting discovery, because I discovered before going to Lisbon this time that the country had just asked the European Commission to increase its migrant quota. And I thought, well, that's a very interesting situation. So when I was there, I asked around a bit, and I discovered the reason. And the reason was that Portugal, of course, gets money for the migrant quota by agreeing to the quota, gets more money by asking to double that quota, only to, I think, 10,000 or so. But the pertinent fact is that the migrants don't stay in Portugal. Clever Portuguese, you may say. They take the money, they virtue signal to the world, and the migrants get back to Germany. So this is just one example of a fascinating a set of transcripts. Otherwise, I'd have no idea why that was going on. You know, the Portuguese just nicer people than the rest of us, are they? And this has happened everywhere. The Greek translation is about to come out. I'm going to Austria for the Austrian edition in a couple of weeks' time, and the country that I was most excited about and was most unsurprising was Germany. This book, in its German translation, when it came out earlier this year, sold out on the first day, and then sold out again, and not one German newspaper said anything about it. Not one. And I have occasional weird back-channel messages from various officials in Germany telling me that they've read it and so on, but it's like some terrible secret you're not meant to tell anyone else. A politician that reads the relevant book, don't tell anyone. But I was very struck but unsurprised really by that situation in Germany. One of the things I've come to the conclusion is that in every country in Europe, everyone is at a different stage in exactly the same debate. You're all in the same debate. It's just you're at different stages. In France, this book's been well received in France, and it's not caused any, it's been well written about in the press, it's not caused any terrible scandal, because what I say is sayable in France even on the left. There are many French politicians and intellectuals and writers of the left who have explored this terrain. They've written about it, they've opened it out. So this is a totally fair and free discussion there. Whereas, as I say, just go next door to Germany and it isn't. Go to other places, and again it's different. This has struck me again and again, and there's one other aspect of that which has struck me, which is that the political reaction in every country has one other issue in common, which is that every country's politics, it seems to me, is again having the same debate as the public are having and the media is having. But the political debate in each country is unbelievably wary of every other country. So I was in Norway recently for the Norwegian edition, and I discovered that various of the Norwegians I was speaking to wouldn't speak to various Danes or various Swedes, noticeably various Swedes, and then, you know, I asked somebody in Austria, do you speak to this person? They don't speak to that person. I mentioned at one point in the book, I think, that when I went to a Sweden Democrats conference to report on it for the book in 2015, in private, the Sweden Democrats I spoke to were asking the same questions everybody else asks me. Have you met X? What do you think of Y? Do you think that Z is beyond the pale? And it's quite funny because every time somebody does it to me, I sort of will say, well, I spoke to Z recently and he thinks you're beyond the pale. And you think this totally fluffy character who no one's got a problem with is some crypto-Nazi, and you can't. And I said to somebody recently, in one of your neighbouring countries, I said to a politician that all of European politics in this era, in this area, looks to me like a teenage dance. Everyone is standing around the sides of the walls. The music's playing. Everyone's wondering which boy will ask which girl to dance first and pretend that they don't want to. And maybe the moment that the dancing breaks out, it'll all be fine and everyone will just realise they've been idiots. But there's some weird teenage angst going on. And I don't think, by the way, it's by any means unreasonable. Because one of the things we're all going to have to work out in the era we're in is precisely what the contours of the new respectability or the new mainstream are going to be. And it is going to be, I think, it's going to be very tricky to work out as we're going through it. I mean, we're going through it at the moment. What are, for instance, what are the new boundary lines? I mean, as I say, if you see that in every country, basically it's the same debate, various people, I mean, another analogy I give is that it's like this isn't just in politics, it's in the media as well. People are watching all the time. And I assume that this whole debate is like mined. It's just one awful, great big bloody minefield. And people sort of stand at the edges of it and they watch, and somebody there treads on a mine and it blows, and you just see if they survive or not. If it takes them out, or if they turn out to be able to skip from mine to mine merrily. And this is a very striking new European phase. I see it everywhere. Have you seen what X has said in this country? They've made this argument. And in that era, of course, there will be people who will go running out straight ahead across the minefield because they want to clear it, because they don't think there should be a minefield. And there'll be some people who'll go running across the minefield for all the wrong reasons. And there'll be some who'll do it because they want to get somewhere very, very dark indeed. And I suggest always, in every country I'm in, that since this is all opening out everywhere, we ought to work out where those kinds of lines might be. We have this deep problem in all of our countries at the moment in Europe, when things that are true but people don't like get described as conspiracy theories. Because then actual conspiracy theories get believed in, because there's no way of differentiating these things. If everything that you know that's actually happening in front of your eyes is claimed to be a conspiracy theory, then actual conspiracy theories, when they come along, all of your immune system is low. You can easily take this stuff on, and I think that's something that's begun to go along in Europe. We have this endlessly with the George Soros debate, where people say that it's always an anti-Semitic smear to attack George Soros, when very obviously, if you're going to be involved in national politics, as George Soros has been in a range of countries, it's eminently possible, and it should be, to be able to criticize him when he does things like he did in Hungary in 2015, when his NGOs were effectively encouraging people to learn how to break the rules or take advantage of the rules at the very least when coming into Europe. Now, this is the problem, is that now we're in this strange era where saying anything about George Soros is to engage in a conspiracy theory. But if things that are true become conspiracy theories, then, as I say, things that are untrue can become true by association. And this is a very, very dark and difficult problem that we're being pushed into. The second example I'd give of that is the very, very tricky debate we're all going to have to go through on that fundamental question of who can be a European. And I am very worried about this. There is an obvious backlash, which could be decent and could be indecent, coming along the line from people saying, I refuse to pretend anymore. It's like the trans debate. I don't want to pretend just because it makes for an easier life. There is such a thing as European people. There is such a thing as people who are Danish, and that doesn't mean that nobody in the world can ever integrate. Of course not. It's just that that's clearly going to be a difference. And because that whole area has been shut down by an entire generation or two of politicians, I think we have not flexed the necessary muscles to keep this debate good in the years to come, and we're going to have to tread incredibly carefully in this period. I had this discussion a little while ago with Bernard-Henri Lévy in an event in London, and one of the things that we sort of got to was that we agreed that if somebody who thought that somebody who was not of the exact nationality of the mainstream in the country, somebody who thought that somebody who wasn't that could never, by dint of their birth, be of that country, was what we regarded as being somewhere like a line. But there's a whole set of that arguments now opening up as well. There's an extraordinary new book that I just reviewed the other week by a British academic called Eric Kaufmann, called White Shift, where he talks about this fact that in every Western country in the 21st century, since people who are ethnically white are going to be in a minority, and this is going to shift in this century, He talks about what are the legitimate versions of politics in that area. What are the bits of it that are plausible? What are the bits of it that are legitimate and reasonable? And what are the bits that are the dark stuff you don't want anything to do with? And this is just, I was very struck by this book because I thought it was light years ahead of the discussion that most of our politicians or media are able to have. And yet it's the discussion going on, because as we all know, in the age of social media, you can't keep the discussion down anymore. You know, people have the ability to find out truths for themselves, and this changes everything. But then, I'm drawing towards the end, but then we have what I think of as being one of the most serious challenges of all. You're a very learned crowd, I'm fairly sure. So you will know probably the source of this quote. But if you didn't, do keep it yourself for a moment. But who do you think said these words a few weeks ago? Europe belongs to the Europeans. Ultimately, the migrants should rebuild their own countries. Now, it sounds like some fascist, jackboot, Nazi, crypto-Nazi, alt-right. And of course, it was said by the Dalai Lama. As I said at the time, typical skinhead. Lift up that saffron robe and its jackboots, I tell you. But this typical skinhead remark throws up a very interesting moral question. There are always people, lunatics online, willing to claim that the Dalai Lama is, after saying that, some kind of crypto-Nazi alt-right. So, I think they probably won't win that one. I happen to think the Dalai Lama is one of the biggest bores in the world, and I don't think he has anything very interesting to say. But I'm interested when he says that, because it's kind of out of character. It's even rather surprising. But here's the problem: why should something be able to be said by the Dalai Lama and not by a member of the public? Why are there things that can come from one mouth and not from another? Why have we fallen into this idea that if there are things that are true and difficult, they have to only be said by an elect? This is a very, very tricky problem. I don't say it's solvable, but we've got to do better than we are at the moment. It seems to me that what the Dalai Lama said is not far off something that is pretty much majority opinion in most European countries. I have endless amounts of polling in my book about what the publics across all of Europe think about issues to do with migration and integration and so on. So people might quibble with words around the edges, but basically what the Dalai Lama said in that speech in Malmo in September, I think it was, is basically majority opinion in Europe. And it's also an opinion which, if you stood up and said it in most countries at the moment, would have you derided as some kind of, non-Dalai Lama fascist. And this extends the whole way across the debate, because none of this can be solved. I said this to somebody yesterday, that none of this can be solved if we say that the public in Europe don't have a right to voice their concerns. But to put it another way, put it at its hardest, these issues cannot be addressed if they're only addressed by people with PhDs or people who went to the right university. And then we tread onto a whole set of follow-on problems, which is why are there things that certain people are allowed to say and others are not? And I mull this all the time, and it concerns me deeply, because to answer any of the questions I pose in this book, You cannot answer them without the general public. You cannot answer them in spite of the general public. And I think that elections in recent years across Europe have shown the public making their voices heard. And that may be the way. It may be just that through the normal democratic process, through voting, people are able to make their concerns heard at a parliamentary level. But it worries me deeply, as I say, that, let's say, a working class person in most countries in Europe could not say what the Dalai Lama said and find themselves still viewed as a perfectly decent citizen. And that in itself seems to me to be a portion, a nutshell of the problem that we are all going to be walking through for a very long time to come. Now, I've detained you for almost 40 minutes, and I know that there's going to be an intermission, and then I think we come back for my Talk Ramada session, when you can ask me anything you want. However, I may not respond. But I would just, I suppose in closing, I should also say that, just once again, it's a real pleasure to be here, and I was also just again very, very touched by your offer of this award, this prize to me. I was also very moved, as all journalists are, that there was a cash component of the prize, because this is unheard of in the era of journalism these days. But it made me think of the copy of Sappho's poems that I picked up on the island of Lesbos, because I turned to the last poem in the Poems and Fragments of Sappho that I picked up on the island, and I see that the 120th fragment says, "Wealth without virtue is a harmful companion, but a mixture of both the happiest friendship." So thank you.